Hey, what's going on, role players? It's the Bard here and welcome back to the corner. Today's video is part 3 of our Cleric analysis covering the Arcana, Death, Forge and Grave domains. So as is par for the course for these Cleric analysis videos, we're going to kick off with the domain spells for each Cleric archetype. So out of the blocks, the Arcane domain gets Detect Magic. I've spent a lot of years watching other players around the table, and this is the kind of spell that they wish they had memorized at the time, because it solves so many problems. This allows you to make better choices for your prepared magic, but still giving you the necessary utility that you crave by having Detect Magic available at all times. Ask any number of players what they think the most common spell in a major spellbook is, and the majority of them will come back with Magic Missile. It's one of those spells that's withstood the test of time. Direct damage, good range, single target, multi-target, force effects, no save. This spell is absolutely incredible when it comes to dealing damage, so it really gives the Arcane Cleric a big boost when it comes to damage output. Again, this is a spell that never misses, so you're going to be able to use it whenever you're in a pinch. There are going to be more powerful spells available to you as you progress in levels, so putting this spell into high level slots isn't going to be as efficient, but it is useful in those situations where you really don't have anything else that you can put into the battlefield. The actual damage capacity it has is only fairly moderate, but it's the fact that it can get around so many different things in order to deal its damage that makes it so good. What with the way that 5th edition is set up and how its proficiency and its numbers are working, Magic Weapon gives you a much greater bonus than it ever has. Even though the numbers remain the same from edition to edition, the fact of the matter is that the numbers that you're trying to hit are going to be lower, so all those extra +1s or +2s are really adding up. I don't really know how valuable this spell is going to be by putting it into higher level slots, but for the beginning levels where you don't have access to magical weapons, it really is going to be a big benefit to you. D&D is one of those games where a point either way can mean the difference between success and failure. You want to be able to say that you did everything in your power to give your party the best possible bonuses they could have in a combat. The Magical is a good spell and it works very well. The 24-hour duration really helps. However, it's knowing when and where to cast this thing. The most common use you'll find for this is to cast spells every single day for a month. That way you can make something permanently appear as something else. However, the more useful variation for this spell is being able to change a creature type so that you can bypass certain spells and effects. So being able to use the mask in order to avoid a symbol or a glyph or possibly an alarm. Really useful spell. It's just knowing when and how to use it. It is a little bit complex and it's probably difficult for newer players to get the hang of, but once you get it, absolutely phenomenal spell that again people just aren't taking, so having it always available to cast, really useful. The only problem with this spell is it's basically all or nothing. If you have a DM who knows how to really use symbols and the like, then you're going to find that this is an absolute lifesaver. If they don't use magical traps, if they don't use symbols, they don't use detections, then you're going to find that it's essentially dead weight. Really good spell, but only really of any value if you have an intense campaign with a lot of advanced players. Dispel Magic, absolutely one of the best spells you can ever get. Even if you're in a low magic scenario, it's still going to be of some use to you. If there's no magic in the scenario at all, your DM would have warned you about that prior and made sure you didn't pick an Arcane Cleric in the first place. This is going to get you out of so much trouble. Just having this always available when you need it, absolutely tip top. One of the best inclusions in my opinion for the Arcane Cleric domain list. Magic Circle is the first of the meh spells for me. Unfortunately, it doesn't really make the cut. The minute casting time means you can't use it when you need it, so it's a setup spell. You're not going to be able to take advantage of it, and then you have the extra cost on top of that, 100 gold pieces worth, which the spell consumes, so you're not going to be able to take full advantage of this all the time. It's going to be one that you want to put into a high level slot, and the higher the better. So whenever you do need it, it's usually if you're in a stagnant place, when you're not moving, where you're fortifying yourself, and you want it to be as absolutely powerful as you can make it, because you're going to be spending 100 gold pieces, whether you cast it at the highest level or at the lowest level. So it's good, it doesn't do enough, and it doesn't do enough when you need it to do it, and that's my big contention with it. This spell does have its functions though, it's just It only works against specifics. So first of all, it's Celestials, Elementals, Fays, Fiends, and Undead. Now that's a good selection, but not everything falls into those categories. The fact that they can't willingly enter is good, the fact that they have disadvantage on attack rolls against you is good, the fact that they can't charm or frighten you or possess you, again, really good. And you can actually turn the spell essentially inside out, so that it works in reverse, allowing you to bind things. But my big problem is that 1 minute casting time. Unless they're like knocked out or under a whole person or a whole monster or any other thing that basically keeps them held so that you can cast this, it's going to take a minute to cast, so you need to be able to hold on for them for 10 rounds. My concern, however, is if you've got spells or bindings that are able to keep that creature in place long enough for you to be able to cast this spell, what's wrong with the spells and bindings that you've just used? Arcane Eye is another spell that I don't particularly find to be that useful. It does have uses, it's just the fact that you don't have any auditory information and the fact that it only lasts up to an hour also make this spell a little bit too prohibitive in my personal opinion. As well as being a 4th level spell as well, I don't know if your spell slot is worth it just to get some visual information. However, I am just being a little bit cynical. I mean, Arcane Eye is not really that bad, especially if you've got a brand new dungeon in front of you. Send the Arcane Eye down it, start looking around the corridors, see where the monsters are. Just look around as many different areas as you can whilst this spell is in effect. So often, and I mean so often, and again this comes from 20 years of experience, everyone walks into the dungeon blind. They haven't done any research, they haven't checked out beforehand. Arcane Eye can be very, very useful in situations like this. You want to give yourself the absolute best possible advantage you can. So having this always available is not actually that bad. So, Leomund's Secret Chest, the D&D equivalent of cloud storage. Just make sure you renew after 60 days, otherwise everything could be irretrievably lost. Still, it's a really great way to get things past guards or into restricted areas. Put all the items in a chest, put it on the ethereal plane, walk into the area completely unarmed, and then as long as you've got your small statuette on you, you can then summon your chest to you, and then you can arm yourself from the inside. So there are a number of uses for this spell. However, the 5,000 gold pieces plus the additional 50 that you need, not really worth it. I'm sure there are cheaper ways for you to infiltrate certain areas. So, Planar Binding allows you to spend up to 1,000 gold pieces to attempt to bind a Celestial, Elemental, Fiend or Fey to your service for a predetermined amount of time. This creature is usually summoned into an inverted magic circle, another 100 gold pieces, before attempting the Planar Binding. If you're going to go this route, choose the minimum spell level for your magic circle and the maximum possible level slot that you can for your Planar Binding. It's going to cost you 1,000 gold pieces regardless of which slot you put it in, so make sure you're getting as much duration out of it as you can. This is definitely not a spell for beginners. Say you manage to pull it off. Even if the creature does fail its save and you do get to have the creature bound to you for a reasonable duration, you've got to be clever about the instructions that you're giving it. Not only do you want the thing to serve you for as long as is humanly possible, but at the same time you also need to word it in such a way that it isn't going to go off and start doing its own thing as part of your instructions. Things that are hostile to you will try and twist your words and make it as easy for themselves and as difficult for you as possible. This is not a spell that you cast whimsically. You need to research every single aspect of it before even attempting to bind a creature to your service. My recommendation, write out everything that you want the creature to do and then check to see that there are no loopholes in it. Treat it like a binding contract, because essentially that's what it is. That is what you're going to be saying to your DM that you want this creature to do and the way you want it to do it. If there are any ways that it can get out of it, it will do so. So make sure you understand fully what you're getting into before you start doing this. But I'm not trying to put you off this spell. It's a great role-playing experience regardless of whether it works or whether it doesn't. But just be aware that it's a lot of investment and it's a lot of potential danger if it does go wrong. So just take it for what it is and just be careful about what you're casting. Teleportation Circle is essentially part of an interconnecting web of potential destinations that you can teleport to. However, they are static locations and you can't just go wherever you like. They have to be certain specific places. In my opinion, you might just be better off waiting until you have 6th level spells where you essentially get access to Word of Recall, putting you and your party one standard action away from being able to teleport back to your sanctuary with a nice warm bed and a nice hot meal. 50 gold pieces a pop to be able to teleport to a number of specific places isn't really very good in my opinion. Even though you can actually create a permanent teleportation circle by casting this every day for a year, you're still looking at up to 5 figures worth of gold pieces in order to make something that will only take you to a specific place. I still think you're better off with just general teleportation or Word of Recall. So there's some interesting spells in this domain list. Some of them start off really good, but then it starts to trail off a little bit as you get to the higher levels. So Arcane Initiate is giving you a free Arcana skill proficiency, and it's giving you 2 wizard cantrips of your choice, and these cantrips count as Cleric cantrips. If you choose damaging cantrips for your Arcane Initiate, then they will also gain the wisdom bonus to damage from your potent spell casting that you'll get at level 8. So Arcane Abjuration works very much like Turn Undead. You can use it against Celestials, Elementals, Fiends or Fae. However, aside from just turning them, instead of destroying these creatures, it banishes them. Now this has a lot of potential when you combine it with some of those other spells in your list. It works really well with your Magic Circle and your Plane of Binding. So not only do you have the potential to turn more creatures, giving you a wider range to use your Channel Divinity with, but instead, if you are using it against lower level creatures, you can actually banish them, and you banish them for up to a minute. This you can combo really well with your Magic Circle. When you use it, they'll disappear for a minute, cast your Magic Circle, invert it, and then after that 1 minute cast, the creature will reappear and it will end up inside the Magic Circle because it appears where it left. Also, because the creature is a lower level, you're going to have a higher level of proficiency, meaning it's going to be a little bit harder for that creature to save against you when you're casting Plane of Binding. You won't have the most powerful of creatures bound to your service, but the chances that you can actually bind it, and the fact that you don't have to really worry about keeping the creature restrained whilst you cast your Magic Circle, will make your life a lot easier. So not only is it useful for getting rid of creatures, at least temporarily, so that you don't have to deal with them, but it's also very useful when it comes to actually binding as well. It's not a free pass, however. You will have to take all the precautions that we've already talked about for Plane of Binding, but it will make your job noticeably easier. So Spellbreaker gives your healing spells a free Dispel Magic to go along with them, which is very, very good. This is a really useful ability, especially when it comes to action economy. And finally, Arcane Mastery gives you a 6th, 7th, 8th and 9th level spell as your domain spells as well, and they're always available for you to cast. This means Project Image, Mind Blank, Time Stop, all those really great spells, and they will always be available when you need them. So overall, a really nice cleric domain hidden away in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. It has the potential to give you so many different options, and most of its abilities are really good. There's only a couple of things in it that aren't amazing, but even then, they can be twisted or used in specific circumstances. I actually think this is a very, very good domain, and one that I've not seen anyone use yet. If you've had any experience with this, let me know and tell me how you're getting along with it, because I think it's potentially really good.
I was broken from a young age, taking my soak into the masses, writing my poems for the few that look at me, took to me, shook at me, feeling me.
So the Death Domain comes from the Dungeon Master's Guide, and unfortunately, on the surface, it doesn't look amazing. We'll delve into it like we do with all the others, but I haven't exactly got high hopes. So the first spell the Death Domain gets is False Life, a spell that's absolutely amazing in first level, mediocre in second, and then after that you'll probably never use it again. So unfortunately, it's even worse for the Death Domain, because if you're a Warlock, you can have it as an invocation, cast it multiple times until you get the maximum result, and then, when you have no further use for it, you can swap out that invocation for another one. Wizards can just stop casting it, and sorcerers can swap out their spells when they're not using them anymore. The Death Domain, however, won't allow you to get rid of False Life, so when you've stopped using it, it's just dead weight, if you'll excuse the pun. Ray of Sickness isn't a terrible damaging spell. It's single target, it's a ray attack, so has the potential for double damage on a critical hit, and the real prize that it has is the disadvantage on attack rolls. Ray of Sickness doesn't scale too badly either, and it'll serve you well for a couple of levels until you get access to some AoE attacks. So Blindness Deafness is a really good spell this time around. Blinded creatures have disadvantage on their attack rolls, and you have advantage on attack rolls against them, but this spell also scales really well as well. it adds an additional creature that you can affect for every spell slot that you use above second. As the name suggests, you can pick either of these two effects. Blindness is the more useful one in combat, but Deafness still has its uses in other certain scenarios. I really think you guys should be looking at Blindness Deafness. Not enough people are using it, and it's a very, very good spell. Ray of Enfeeblement is one of those spells that's kind of in a rough spot. It doesn't really do amazing stuff at low level, because half of those low level damage scores isn't going to be a lot. It's really going to shine in higher levels. However, whenever you go into those higher level encounters and they get to save every round after you've struck them with it, they're going to have a much greater chance of being able to shrug off the effects. So if you're going to go with this spell, you might want to look at trying to get Bane or something on your target, and then perhaps try to get some disadvantage on their saving throws as well. So your third level spell is Animate Dead. Personally, I don't think it's an amazing spell, at least not in this edition. Leave this to the Necromancers, at least they know what they're doing. When you only have medium skeletons to deal with, they're little better than just fetch and carry creatures, or a few additional hit points for your enemies to cut through before they get to you. Bestow Curse, on the other hand, is one of the best spells that you'll ever get in third level, ranging anywhere from a minute up to permanent, and not having any concentration on it after you cast it in a 5th level slot. This spell encourages you to be creative with it, as well as giving you a whole bunch of examples of what you could possibly do with the spell as well. This is one of my favourite debilitations, and I would use it as often as I possibly could. So Blight is a very good spell. It's single target, does 8d8 damage, saving throw for half, and it's necrotic. When it comes to direct damage, this is probably the best single target damaging spell for the Death Cleric, and we'll go into that a little bit later in the video when we start discussing the Death Cleric abilities. I like what they've done with Death Ward in this edition. 8-hour duration, an improved version of Relentless Endurance, and essentially you get a get out of jail free card when it comes to an instant death effect. So it's a pretty good defense to have. I'm not a big fan of Anti-Life Shell. Too many intelligent enemies can just find an easy way around it using either ranged attacks or spells. It's good for dealing with things like beasts, which generally have low intellect, but other creatures that have low intellect include constructs and undead, which unfortunately the Anti-Life Shell is useless against anyway. You've definitely got better uses for your 5th level slot. Cloud Kill is probably more of an indoor spell. It's okay, it moves around a little bit and it does deal enough damage in order to be useful. However, most creatures can just avoid it, so it's one for tight corridors or rooms where there isn't much place they can go. The Death Domain has a few absolute gems when it comes to spells, however the majority of it just lets the thing down. So the Death Domain gets martial weapon proficiency. Now come on, you just put this in so that they can carry around scythes. Come on, Wizards of the Coast, be honest. Reaper gives you a necromancy cantrip from any other class. So Chill Touch? There aren't a lot of other options. But the real prize is being able to use your necromancy cantrips against 2 targets that are near each other, so at least you get a bit better damage output. So your Touch of Death deals additional damage. It's equal to 5 plus twice your cleric level, which when added on to your regular attack, as well as whatever strength or dexterity bonuses you may have, and also considering at level 8 you also get additional necrotic damage, you can actually do a fair amount in a single swing. So this is definitely really good for your attacks of opportunity. Inescapable Destruction allows you to ignore damage resistance for your spells when it comes to necrotic damage, and it also works really nicely for Channel Divinity as well. This is going to make spells like Blight, as we mentioned earlier, much more frequent in your usage because nothing will be able to resist the necrotic damage. Divine Strike, par for the course as with most clerics. Once per round you get an additional d8 damage when you hit level 8 or 2d8 when you hit level 14. This is necrotic damage, so the nice thing about it is, again, it's not a really frequently resisted energy type. And finally, at level 17, Improved Reaper, where your spells ranging from level 1 to level 5, as long as they're single target necromancy spells, can actually now target 2 creatures that are standing next to each other. This is a really terrible option in my opinion, because it means you're going to have to use low level spells rather than using higher level ones, and the higher level ones usually hit multiple targets anyway. There could have been so many great options they could have put into this ability, but instead they chose to just improve on some of your single target necromancy spells. I was really quite disappointed with Death Cleric. I think it's something that's got a lot of character, there's a lot of potential for interesting role playing, but mechanically it just doesn't work the way I would like it to. All of your abilities are geared towards improving your damage. Most of the spells you get really aren't amazing in and of themselves. Some of the really good ones that you do get are already on the cleric list, so it's not really worth having them as your domain list. Thematically it could be a lot of fun, but mechanically I just don't think it works. It feels like it's been rushed out in order to fill some space in the DM's handbook in order to give the players some villainous archetypes for them to go up against. With a little care and attention, this might have been something special, but we'll never know what we could have had if they just put a little bit of extra time into it. So this is the one that most of you have been waiting for, the Forge domain. On the surface it looks really good. A lot of different paths that you can take, a lot of variety in it, and really useful in a variety of situations. So let's just have a quick delve into it and see just how good it is. I've already covered Identify a Magic Weapon at the beginning with the Arcana domain, so everything that I said there applies here. Searing Smite is a pretty damn good spell. It's an energy type, it's going to improve the damage of your regular hit anyway, and it's got the potential to deal some damage over additional rounds, so it's definitely a good inclusion, especially at first level. Heat Metal is one of those spells that I could spend an entire video talking about. Not only is it ridiculously powerful, it happens over multiple rounds, and it has the potential to rack up an enormous amount of damage. But not only that, you also have the possibility of really interesting mind games with it as well. Is the creature going to disarm itself to avoid damage? Is it going to doff its armor in order to avoid damage? Is it going to take certain actions because it predicts you're going to use the spell, or is it going to take other actions because it predicts you're going to use your bonus action for something else? It's so versatile, and this thing is absolutely amazing. Really start playing the mind games with this spell and get some really interesting extra layers to your combat as well. Finally, Elemental Weapon is appearing on a spell list that has at least a 7th level spell slot, allowing the spell to reach its maximum possible potential. You want as many hits with the enchanted weapon as you can get, so this spell is really great for things like Polar Master builds. Protection from energy isn't anything to write home about, but considering the fact it's in your domain spell list, at least it's there when you need it to be. The Forge domain is giving you resistance to fire, so by casting this spell you can at least have a second resisted energy type. In 10 minutes, Fabricate can get you access to all kinds of mundane items. Plus, if you have the correct proficiencies, you can make even more complex things, like weapons and armor. It just so happens that the Forge domain gives you a free bonus proficiency with Smith's tools anyway. The Forge domain gets Wall of Fire, so that's some of your defensive and crowd controlling options covered. And you've also got the minions bases covered as well when it comes to animate objects. Again, this is another one for the creative minds. You can terrorize the faithful by having the statue of their deity come to life, or you can get through locked doors by animating the door and having it unlock itself. Whatever your mind can think of. And when all else fails, Creation gives you access to almost anything that you want at any time. When you start casting this in higher level slots, you can increase the size of the cube that you can fit the object into. So eventually you can start doing really wild things like siege weapons or fortifications. So Forge has an impressive array of domain spells, with some of its best ones coming from lists like Paladin, Druid and Wizard. So heavy armor proficiency is a welcome addition, especially if you want to go down more of a fighter style route. And proficiency with Smith's tools means you can make your own weapons and armor, as well as being able to make better use of your Fabricate spell. So Blessing of the Forge is a really great ability. It's giving you either a +1 weapon or a +1 suit of armor for the entire day. Whoever who has this is going to be really grateful, but the best part about it, it's a first level ability, meaning you essentially have access to a magical item from day one. So even in those campaigns where magic items are really rare, at least you'll have an option to overcome resistance to non-magical weapons. Artisan's Blessing, very much like a simpler version of Fabricate. By taking an hour-long ritual, you can create an item up to 100 gold pieces as long as you've got basically some metal in front of you. I wonder if perhaps you could use this to turn the bars of a jail into a weapon, thereby freeing yourself and arming yourself at the same time. Soul of the Forge, extra AC and fire resistance? Yes please. And Divine Strike allows you to add fire damage to your melee attacks. Yes, it's a commonly resisted energy type, but you're talking about a D8 roll or a 2D8 roll, so you're not going to be losing out on that much really. And finally we cap the whole thing off with Saint of Forge and Fire, giving you blanket immunity to all fire damage. It also gives you resistance to bludgeoning, piercing and slashing if it's done with non-magical weapons. However, at this point in the game, most creatures are likely going to have access to some form of magical weapon, or at least have the ability to cast a spell that will make a weapon magical anyway. So that part of it probably isn't as much use as I would like it to be. But still, at least it's there, and at least it's something you can take advantage of when it comes to certain larger non-magical creatures. The Forge domain boasts an impressive array of abilities, giving you an advantage when it comes to weapons, when it comes to armor, and when it comes to utility. Couple that with the General Cleric's wide range of utility and restoration skills, and you have a really versatile character on your hands. So we finally get to the last tradition on our list, and it's the Grave domain. This is a little bit of an odd domain because it seems to try to blur the lines between the healing and the death domains. However, it's not a terrible one, it's just a little bit of a one-trick pony. There isn't a great deal in it. But let's delve into it and find out what it can do. So just to speed things along a little bit, everything I've said already about False Life, Ray of Enfeeblement, Blight, Death Ward and Anti-Life Shell apply here just as much as they do to the other domains. Bane is an excellent debuff that scales really well, reducing significant numbers of attack rolls and saving throws from your targets. Whilst this is an excellent spell, it's already available on the Cleric list, although having it for free just means that you can make other spell selections. I don't think you honestly need Gentle Repose available all the time. The amount of times that you're going to have to stop a corpse from decaying or prevent one from rising as undead isn't going to be occurring as often as you might think it would. I've said it before, 300 gold pieces worth of diamonds is a small price to pay in order to cheat death. However, if you're doing your job correctly, whether you're any kind of cleric, you shouldn't really have too much need of this. Still, worth keeping the material components lying around. If you do happen to enter into a room and someone's just murdered someone who you were trying to rescue, at least you'll be able to quickly revive them after the combat is finished. Vampiric Touch is a respectable strategy. It's doing a reasonable amount of damage and you're getting half of that returned to you as HP every time you hit. So it's worth using if you're somewhere in the mid-range on your HP total. Still, it's a spell that really benefits from having it put into a higher level slot. You use a 5th level slot, for example, that's 5d6 damage every touch and you get 10 touches over the course of 1 minute. So you're going to do a lot of damage and get a lot of HP restored. Raise Dead is only marginally better than Revivify in the fact that it can restore something to life that's died up to 10 days ago. It also has the extra added benefit of being able to remove things like poison and diseases, meaning you don't have to cleanse the body before you bring it back to life like you would have to with Revivify. Again, 500 gold pieces is not a lot to ask to bring a creature back to life that's died up to 10 days ago. If you're having to use this on a regular enough basis to justify having it in your list of domain spells, then perhaps you ought to look at just how much money you're getting for every adventure and how much of a challenge your DM is putting in front of you every time. A bit of a mixed bag of spells here. Of the good ones that are available, there really aren't enough of them to cover the mediocre ones on your domain list. So Circle of Mortality gives you 2 things, however neither one of them is really that amazing. You're getting Spare the Dying for free, so you get a free cantrip. However, you get the benefit of being able to cast it at a range of up to 30 feet as a bonus action instead of a range of touch as a standard action. At least it's a free cantrip and at least it's easier to use than normal. However, if you find yourself using this an awful lot, you might want to reconsider your entire battle strategy. The other part of this ability is essentially maximize healing, but again it's only when a creature is at 0 hit points and requires stabilization. There's some interesting role playing going on here, but it's a very dangerous game that you're playing. You get more efficient healing, but only when they're about to die. It's a very interesting concept. Mechanically it doesn't work amazingly, but there's still some fun to be had in there, and it can really put the wind up your players when you're letting them get to basically as close to death as possible before healing them up to full. So Eyes of the Grave is a 60-foot radius detect undead spell essentially. You get it for 1 round and it tells you where the creatures are, but it doesn't tell you anything about them. And you can only use this ability a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier, and that's per long rest. This is a really bad ability. Chances are you're not going to be up against undead enough to make this a viable option. If it's a purely undead based campaign, then it's going to be of much more use to you. But that's a very specific thing, and not everyone wants to play in such a campaign. Your channel divinity is Path to the Grave. It's a very well balanced channel divinity in the sense that it requires an action to use, and thus the next attack against the creature will then have vulnerability. Vulnerability is something you really don't see very often, so being able to put it on a creature has a lot of potential to end a combat really quickly. Especially when you're working together with characters like rogues, or if you've got someone who can confirm an automatic critical hit, something with the paralyzed condition for example, or if someone's rolled natural 20 on their portent ability, something like that you can guarantee a critical hit with. in which case then you'll be able to increase the damage even further by adding vulnerability to that strike. I'd say this was the Grave Cleric's best ability, although as I said before, it kind of makes it a little bit of a one-trick pony. You really only pick Grave Cleric for this ability. So Sentinel at Death's Door allows you to use a reaction in order to prevent a critical hit, reducing it to essentially a normal hit, which isn't actually that bad. You're not going to use it all the time, but it's only available a number of times per day equal to your wisdom modifier, so it's fairly reasonably balanced. This ability is good in a pinch, but unfortunately the best abilities are ones that you can use on a regular basis, and you can't guarantee when or where you're going to get a critical hit. Additionally, when a monster deals a critical hit to you, it's usually only a couple of extra dice of damage that get added on, so it's not an enormous amount of additional hit points of damage that you're taking. This ability only really shines when it comes to things like smites or sneak attacks, where they have lots and lots of multiple dice which are getting added on to their damage roll. Also, in a lot of cases, the additional damage that you usually take comes from a creature's pluses, not necessarily from the amount of dice it has. So, as far as a defensive ability goes, if you'll excuse the pun, this one doesn't really make the cut. Potent Spellcasting adds your wisdom modifier to your cantrip damage, enough said. And finally, your Keeper of Souls ability gives you a number of hit points equal to the number of hit dice of the creature that has died within 60 feet of you. So essentially, if you have, say, a 10 hit dice creature and it dies, you or someone else within your party gains 10 hit points. I just want everyone to be very aware of the fact that you get this ability at level 17, and at level 17 you have the capacity to cast Miracle. Even at level 11 you can cast Heal, which gives you 70 hit points worth of healing. It's an interesting ability, but one that perhaps should have come in a lot earlier during the cleric's progression. Even though you can use this ability round after round after round, it still requires your party to be defeating their foes at regular intervals in order for you to gain enough back from it. It's simply just not giving you enough for a level 17 ability. I have to admit, the staving off of death, the blurring of lines between the here and the hereafter, really interesting concept and lots of great role-playing opportunity. Unfortunately, mechanically, I don't think this class has anything near the abilities that some of the others do. There's some very interesting risk versus reward mechanics going on within this domain, however, and there seems to be a serious theme of balance going on where it comes to things like preventing critical hits or creating vulnerable hits. So the whole cycle of balance is very, very interesting within it. It's not quite offering enough to be a really good or even really playable class. So after nearly an hour of discussing the Cleric over the course of 3 videos, where do I feel that they sit within the rankings? Which offer you the path to true salvation and which are the false prophets? The Death domain should probably remain dead and buried. Its abilities are focused too narrowly around a single energy type. Also, the spells that it has aren't really that great either. The few that it does have that are really good are already available on the Cleric list anyway. Its Channel Divinity is also focused solely on dealing necrotic damage, and its level 17 ability is a joke, forcing you to use low level spells in order to hit multi-targets, when you can just use higher level spells at that level and still hit multiple targets. What a waste. Grave Cleric sits in a similar spot to Death. Unfortunately, it also has very, very poor abilities and a number of spells that you don't need on a regular basis, so there's not a lot of point in really having them in your domain list. Grave only narrowly peaks ahead of Death, and that's just because of its ability to put vulnerability on a creature. Its other abilities just aren't powerful enough, especially the ones at level 17. It's only giving you minor hit points. The defense that it has is pretty poor because it only happens every so often, and its first core ability is something you can only use when the people in your party are already dying. So, to me, it's just not an amazing Cleric domain. The Light is a very mediocre domain. It's got poor abilities, some of which are just improvements on the ones that came before it. Its Channel Divinity is reasonably good, however, it overwrites one of your decent spells, which is Daylight. The only other good spell in your list is going to be Fairy Fire, and everything else is just geared towards dealing damage. The things I do like about it, however, are the heavy armor proficiency and the radiant damage on the Divine Strike, but other than that, it's not something I'd really want to delve any further into. So why is War so far down the list? Well, unfortunately, you only get to make a few bonus attacks as your main ability. You only get to do that a number of times equal to your Wisdom modifier. Then you've got your Channel Divinity. You've got a second version of it, which is basically a repeat of the first, except that you can put it on someone else other than yourself. And your final ability really isn't very good because most of the time creatures are going to have magical weapons anyway, which will overcome your resistances. War is very good at what it does. Unfortunately, it just doesn't do very much. It does have some useful utilities, but only a couple, and it's better off for you to actually multi-class with War Domain as opposed to go all the way from start to finish. 7 isn't a bad position for nature to be in. It does have some really amazing abilities, but it also has some absolutely terrible ones as well. Some of the spells it has are great for crowd controlling effects, and some of the actual utility that's within it is really good as well. However, there are certain spells and abilities that you just won't be using on a regular basis. The animal and plant based abilities and spells are only going to be so useful, especially in the beginning, although as you progress in levels you'll find that you won't be using them quite as much. However, this is offset by the fact that there are some amazing abilities in this domain as well. Really useful abilities include having heavy armor proficiency, being able to have access to additional skills, being able to have access to additional druid cantrips, defenses against multiple energy types, and having a divine strike that has a variety of different energy types that you can apply to your weapon instead of just one, which is what makes nature a really versatile domain. The life domain comes in at 6 purely because of its accessibility for newer players. It's so efficient when it comes to healing that it allows you to take other spells which you can memorize and then have much more options when it comes to, say, utility, defense, offense, social, so you can really start to play around with your spell list a lot more. Having access to things like heavy armor also helps your survivability, and getting spells like Bless or Spiritual Weapon complement really nicely your Divine Strike ability, allowing you to move into a more melee style character, or even multi-class into something a little bit more proficient in combat. The Tempest domain hits really hard whether you're using melee attacks or whether you're using spells, but really it's got amazing utilities in it as well. It gets access to Fog Cloud, Gust of Wind, Shatter, Sleet Storm. Your Channel Divinity affects 2 damage types instead of just 1. Your Thunderbolt Strike is great for moving things around the battlefield, giving you a technique that a lot of other people don't have. And your Stormborn ability allows you to fly whenever you're not underground or indoors, so you always have access to that as well. All these abilities put together make for a very strong, very mobile and very unique character. The Arcana domain is excellent from start to finish, starting you off with an extra proficiency and some extra cantrips, moving all the way up to the top tier wizard spells, of which you can have whichever ones you choose. Arcana has some very good utility spells. It also has some which are of much greater value as you personally gain more experience with the game. The more you start to do, the more your DM puts in front of you, the more valuable your domain spell list becomes. Your Spellbreaker ability is great for your casting efficiency, and your Arcane Mastery gives you a level of flexibility that no other domain can. This is a very well balanced domain, and it has the potential to be really good in a variety of different campaigns. The Knowledge domain is so good because it gives you access to additional skills, it gives you access to expertise in certain skills as well, doubling your proficiency. Knowledge also gives you access to additional languages, something that very few classes actually do. Your Channel Divinity is also excellent, giving you access to those skills that you're not actually proficient in. You can help anyone at any time. You can help the Rogue when it comes to stealthing, you can help the Paladin when it comes to persuasion, you can help the Ranger when it comes to survival, you could even help the Bard when it comes to performance. It's not just skills you can have proficiency in, you can also have proficiency with tools, meaning you can make better crafting rolls. And when it comes to your spells, you have a great variety of scrying and information gathering magic. You also have some really good enchantment magic in the form of being able to manipulate individuals with things like command and suggestion, and having some good crowd control when it comes to spells like confusion. This is a very useful and very flexible domain that's a lot more powerful than its name might suggest. The Trickery domain has an excellent spell list. Everything from subterfuge and infiltration to just flat out breaking another person's mind or just changing them into a completely harmless form. Advantage on stealth rolls is absolutely incredible. Being able to give someone that ability, let them stealth past, get them into a safe spot, and then put it on the next person and keep doing that until everyone is in a safe place. Your Invoked Duplicity is probably one of the best abilities you can ever get your hands on. Since the illusion is a perfect copy of you, it makes for an excellent defense. Being able to cast spells as though you were in its space means that creatures may be more likely to attack that, thinking that that's the real caster. It also gives you an element of flexibility where you can attack things that you might actually not have direct line of effect to, as well as the fact it also offers advantage, giving you that flanking bonus when it comes to melee attacks against the creature that is right next to it. If all that wasn't enough, at level 17 your improved duplicity gives you 4 of these illusions, meaning many different angles of attack, lots more options when it comes to defense, and the creatures never really know which of you is going to be the true caster. For absolute maximum confusion, have your improved duplicity up, cast mirror image, and then you've got up to 8 potential targets, only one of which is the real you. Forge takes the top spot, but it's here because it deserves to be, not just because it's a popular domain. This is a really excellent domain that works well whether you decide to go for a multi-class character or just for a single class Forge Cleric. First of all, your spell list is incredibly well balanced. You can be more of a caster or you can be more of a melee combatant. You have access to some reasonable utilities. You also have access to things like Wall of Fire and Animate Objects, which allows you to put things between you and your enemies. And Animate Object can also be used in more of a utility function, as we discussed earlier. Blessing of the Forge is an absolutely amazingly versatile ability, allowing both magical weapons and magical armor. You can have these yourself or you can give them to a member of your party. If you do decide to wear them yourself, it will stack up nicely with the +1 AC you gain from wearing heavy armor due to your Soul of the Forge. Resistance to fire and later complete immunity to it is really nice, and having resistance to bludgeoning, slashing and piercing is also really good later in your progression, allowing you to concentrate less on yourself and be more useful to the rest of your party. Your Artisan's Blessing is very good. It's a very unique kind of channel divinity, but it also rewards you for taking certain skills with artisans or smith's tools, allowing you to make better things when you're using it. Forge really can do it all, but unlike other classes that try to do a little bit of everything, at least Forge does everything it does competently. I think Forge deserves to take the top spot, not only because it's well balanced, but also because it's very thematical and mechanically the whole thing works really well. You can do almost anything you would like to do with it, whether that be single class or multi-class, and it just gives you a whole bunch of different options and a variety of interesting spells to work with. Okay guys, thanks for watching part 3 of this Cleric analysis. I know it was like 40 minutes long, I know it takes forever, but this really was something I wanted to put a lot of time and effort into. It has taken a really long time to get this video together, but hopefully it was worth it. It might not seem like it takes a long time, but things like the transitions between the texts and that kind of stuff, just setting those up and doing lots of them, especially when it comes to the final countdown, takes a really long time. Still, I felt you guys deserved a nice long video since a lot of my time has been taken up with projects like the GM's Tarot, so it has been eating into my time a lot and my videos haven't really been as consistent as I would like them to be, because all of my time and effort seems to be going into business projects and other things like that. So hopefully this will make up for the fact that I'm not kicking out as many videos as I normally would like to. Still, I feel like I owe you guys a fairly long and fairly in-depth video because you've waited so long for this one. And you guys have been so supportive. You know, you've been commenting on the channels, you've been liking, you've been sharing it about in places, and really helping the channel grow. So that's really been amazing. A big thanks to everyone who helps the community grow. Be sure to like the video, leave your comments down below and tell me the sort of things you'd like to see next from the channel, and if you're not already subscribed, why not consider doing so. And after all of that, I will see you guys next time at the gaming table.